By now, you've probably seen at least one AI-generated image in your Twitter feed. These AI-generated images are mind-blowing because they feel so different from anything we've ever seen before. Well, what if I'll tell you we actually have seen it before? In this video, I'll tell you about the first image generation revolution, the invention of the camera around 200 years ago. We'll see the economic and artistic impact it had on painters, and we'll discuss 5 possible takeaways for our own AI revolution. Okay, so our story begins in 1838, when Louis Daguerre reveals the daguerreotype, essentially the world's first camera. Nowadays, we all have a camera in our pocket at all times, so it's easy to forget just how revolutionary the invention of the camera really was. Throughout human history, for thousands of years, creating an image required an artist with at least some level of skill. The camera changed all of that. Being able to use a relatively simple device to capture images that then last forever blew people's minds away. So in a sense, 1838, much like 2022, was a revolutionary year for image creation. Now let's get to the interesting part. What happened after the mind-blowing discovery of the camera, and what can it tell us about our own future with AI? Lesson number 1. The power of open source. One of the reasons for the explosive use of the daguerreotype was that it was actually open sourced. Yeah, that's right. The French Parliament paid Daguerre a pension for the rest of his life, and in turn got the right to publish the design of the daguerreotype, so anyone around the world could create one for free. This is actually very similar to what we're seeing today with open source models like Stable Diffusion. Anyone with a basic understanding of programming can get started using these models for free. The speedy adoption of the daguerreotype, mostly in the United States, illustrate the power of open source. We can expect open source to have the same impact on the speed of adoption for generative AI as it did for the camera. Lesson number 2, the killer app. When a new technology comes along, there's a search for the killer app, the main use case that will justify adopting this new tech.
What's the killer app? The killer app is making calls.
For the camera, that killer app was taking people's portraits. You see, back then, having your picture taken by a professional painter was a luxury available mostly to the rich. But thanks to the camera, ordinary people could now afford to have a lasting image of themselves or their loved ones. It's worth asking, why was portrait painting the killer app of the camera and not, say, landscape painting? The first and more obvious reason is that the camera just wasn't ready to compete with landscape painting. The first camera, the daguerreotype, produced relatively small photos in black and white. Not exactly something to cover the walls of your estate with. For portraits, however, the crucial part was accuracy. And since the daguerreotype performed so well on that front, everything else was just excused. The second, more important reason is economic. As I mentioned earlier, portraits were expensive. The high price reflected the fact that many people wanted a lasting image either of themselves or a loved one. But there just weren't that many skilled artists out there to paint everyone. In other words, portraits were expensive due to high demand and low supply. That just wasn't the case for landscape painting. The demand just wasn't there. If generative AI would follow the same trend, we can expect the killer app to be both immediately feasible and disrupt something that is currently very expensive. Possible examples would be designing a website or illustrating a kid's book. Both can be done today by AI at a quality that would cost thousands of dollars if it would have been done by an artist. Lesson number 3, the human in the loop. As I've mentioned before, the early adopters of camera-made portraits were the masses, ordinary people who couldn't afford a fancy painter. In business terms, this population represented an opportunity for high-volume, low-price product. And the camera was able to meet this demand because it required very little manual work. In other words, we can say the camera automated most of the manual work in the process of creating a portrait. Meanwhile, at the high end of the portrait market, the rich people look down at these camera-made portraits. In fact, some people say that this is where the word kitsch comes from. So the high-end portrait painters were in no way out of a job when the camera was invented. But interestingly enough, they too incorporated the camera into their work. These high-end painters used to ask their clients to stand still for a long period of time, which can be kind of tiring. Now, the same painters use the camera to take a quick photo of the person and then paint the portrait based on the photo. What we're seeing here is that the camera was used to automate parts of the portrait making process, both in the high end and in the low end of the market. At the low end, where price was more important than quality, the automation was more extensive. At the high end, where quality mattered most, the camera played a smaller part. The implication for generative AI is that cheap images, for example, $5 logos on Fiverr, would be fully automated with little to no human effort involved in the process. In fact, this is playing out as we speak. There are YouTube videos out there right now that teach Fiverr artists how to use AI to automate their work. Now, that doesn't mean Fiverr artists are out of a job. Like many low-end painters that replace the painting brush for a camera, these Fiverr artists will replace Photoshop for AI models. Lesson number 4, the dynamics of technology. When the daguerreotype was first invented in 1838, many newspaper illustrators thought it's a really cool little toy, but not something that would completely change their profession. And it's hard to blame them for that. The first models of the daguerreotype required an exposure time of up to 15 minutes. That means the object of the photo needed to stay still during that time. Some say that's the reason you don't see many people smile in old photos. It was just too hard to hold a smile for that long. The long exposure requirement made sense for portraits, but not for newspapers who wanted to show stuff like protest rallies. The daguerreotype photos were seen as magical and mind-blowing, but also completely removed from illustrators' day-to-day work. So most of them just shrugged and moved on.
Big mistake. Huge.
As we now know, technology, much like a protest rally, just won't stand still. Once a breakthrough has been achieved, it opens the doors to countless follow-ups that rely on that breakthrough to optimize different parts of the invention. In a few short years, the exposure time of the camera went to under a minute, which is why we have photos of the Crimean War of 1854. In 1878, it was down to a fraction of a second. And in 1880, we start seeing photos in newspapers. This seems like something we should keep in mind when we're trying to predict the future of generative AI. The limitations we see today might not be there tomorrow, and whole new applications may become relevant. Lesson number 5, the impact on art. The camera changed not only the way we create images, but also the kind of images we wanted to create. It did that in multiple ways. First, imagine you're a painter living in post-Napoleonic France. You're an ambitious little painter, so you always want to improve your painting skills. One way to do that is by seeing what good paintings actually look like.
Wow! You nailed it.
Naturally, you go to Google Images and search for The Birth of Venus. Then you notice your internet is not working since it haven't been invented yet. So you just pack your stuff and go live in Italy for a few years. That was what life looked like before the camera. Soon after the creation of the camera, painters could buy books filled with photos of the world's best paintings. Basically, the first version of Google Images. It's hard to overstate the impact this access had on paintings all over the world. The second impact that the camera had on art has to do with the competitive advantage of the artist as a human. You see, the camera was really good at capturing reality with all its details. Even skilled artists couldn't compete with that level of detail. So younger painters who were already born to a world with cameras started to emphasize what the cameras couldn't do, give a certain interpretation to reality. These artists were the founders of the Impressionist art movement, a whole new type of art born out of technological advancement. The camera, like generative AI, is a tool, a means to an end. But from the history of the camera, we can guess that AI too will not just change the way we create images, but also the kind of images we want to create. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you so much for watching the video all the way to the end. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe to help this humble channel grow. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.